Hello, and welcome to our class today on Buddhist conversion and assimilation. So today we're going to be looking at two sort of paradigms for in which Buddhism is able to incorporate other deities within them. Now, these two paradigms are one, sort of the forced subjugation and conversion, usually quite violently in the narrative, of other Hindu deities into the Buddhist pantheon. The other version is assimilation or soft influence. This is which they sort of bring a deity such as Vishnu into the Buddhist fold, but they don't have a forced conversion. They just sort of slowly and steadily sort of just fold the Hindu deity into a Buddhist culture. So we're looking at different ways that we incorporate deities into other religious contexts. As we see in India, these religious worlds are vast and often incorporate across traditions, whether it's Hindu deities coming into Islam, or in this case, Hindu deities going into Buddhism, and we'll also see the reverse, in which the Buddha is incorporated into the Hindu pantheon. So the first paradigm we're going to look at is the paradigm of sort of forced conversion and subjugation. So in the two narratives that we read today, we had the Buddha, or a different bodhisattva, sort of utterly subjugates, dominates Shiva, and renders him unconscious or dead. Then upon reviving that deity, that Shiva, the god Shiva vows to protect Buddha and protect Buddhism. Now, the context here is Vajrayana, which is also called the Mantra Naya or the Mantrayana, the vehicle or path of mantras, which is, as we saw before, an offshoot of Mahayana. So this has a double fold. One, it incorporates Shiva into Buddhism, and two, it establishes the primacy of Tantric Buddhism over not only other vehicles of Buddhism, but over Hinduism. So what's the context here? So we see that in these monasteries, there were all sorts of different kinds of monks. You would have some monks that were doing administration, running the place. Other ones were artists, making images, or various Buddhist arts and crafts. Then you would also see the people that were laborers. And then at the top, depending how you look at it, you'd have people that are doing meditation and writing scriptures. Conservative estimate is that only 20% tops of the monks in any given large monastery, Buddhist monastery in India, would have been these meditators and authors. Now, outside of the Buddhist monastery, you would have Buddhist monks and charismatic figures who were not involved in the monastery, maybe because they were doing too much tantra, maybe because monasteries just weren't their things. These tended to be these Siddhas. Now, Siddhas, or these perfected ones, were sort of charismatic sort of tellers of tales and demonstrators of miracles. So they would be sort of at the periphery, and they would wander around sort of talking to people and telling them these incredible stories about Buddhist power to sort of convert them or get them to patronize Buddhism. And in time, these tales of Siddhas and these charismatic outsiders would have been incorporated into sort of the Buddhist mainstream. So in our story about the subjugation of Shiva, we have, and I have a picture up here of Shiva in a Buddhist context surrounded by Ganesha, his one son, and you can't see because of my face, Skanda on the other side, his other son. To the bottom and to the right, you see Vajradhara or Vajrapani, he who holds Vajras, and you can see that he's holding these two sort of Vajra symbols right there that are symbols of lightning bolts, enlightenment, magical power. And to the bottom left, we see this deity, Vairochana. Now, Vairochana is the Shakyamuni Buddha. That is our historical Buddha, but he sort of exists in this tantric realm, sort of in the cosmos. So, as I said, we have this bodhisattva, wrathful Vajrapani or Vajradhara, the one who has lightning or diamonds in his hands. Vairochana is this historical Buddha, and Mahadeva or Maheshwara means like great lord or great god. This is Shiva, the king of gods, the king of demons. The text that we're looking at that Davidson translated is out of the Sarva Tathagata Tattva Sangraha, which is a big text that's filled with all sorts of different rituals for meditating upon and worshiping all these sorts of different Buddhist characters, often to either cause powerful, quick enlightenment, but more often to gain magic powers and worldly might. In the story, we see that all the Buddhas come together and ask Vajrapani to sort of bring all the powerful Buddhas and whatnot all together inside of him in order to help the world. But Vajrapani is like, nah, I don't like it, because there's still these gods who are criminal gods, he calls them. They're gods who have not they have not become Buddhist. So Vajrayana, this deity that is Shakyamuni, this historical Buddha, he actually creates a wrathful Vajrapani. Now he does this by taking the syllable, this mantra hum, from the hearts of all the Buddhas, incorporating them into himself, and then sort of emanating out of his own heart through another mantra, this wrathful, crazed, mad Vajrapani, who we have a picture of here in the Tibetan context. So what happens is all these other Buddhas then once again, even though he has come, they have emanated him out of Vajrayana, they go back into him. So Vajrapani, Vajradhara becomes the essence. He has all of the Buddhas within him. So what we see is we have this condensation of all the Buddhas into one sort of wrathful, scary figure. Now, Mahadeva says, no way, man. I'm not hanging out with this Vajradhara, Vajrapani. I'm not converting to him. I'm just not doing it. So, and he kind of acts like a bit of a jerk and says that he will not bow down to a local tree spirit. Intriguingly, our Vajrapani and Vajradhara, both these two names are used for yakshas, these tree spirits. So before they become Buddhist figures, we actually see them in very early texts and sculpture as being these sort of tree spirits that people would appeal to for various reasons. So what happens is Vajrapani pulls all of the powers, all these Buddhas into a mantra and uses it to boom, knock him out, knock out Mahadeva. So he completely knocks him out. And at this point, he dies, but he's still going to talk. He's unconscious and he's still talking. This is how these narratives work. So what happens is the other gods are dominated and knocked out as well after Mahadeva gets knocked out. And they say, whoa, whoa, all the world is going to dissolve if you leave us knocked out and you leave us destroyed. So for the sake of the world, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess at this point, if everybody's going to die, then we need to recognize the power of Buddhism and of Vajradhara, Vajrapani. So the deities all sort of awaken, and they take refuge to Vajradhara. Now, taking refuge or taking vows means you vow to protect and uphold the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the three jewels of Buddhism. Now, Mahadeva, oh my goodness, look, you can barely see that. Mahadeva is not revived. He, what happens is he sort of appeals to Vajrayana and says, hey, come on, let me out of this. This Vajradhara guy is messing with me, let me out of this. But Vajrayana, the Buddhist Shakyamuni, says that only Vajrapani can revive him. Now, Mahadeva is really stubborn. And finally, this wrathful Vajrapani dominates him. And he strings him up upside down along with his wife, Uma. In this mantra that you see, there's a Sanskrit phrase that says, Pada karshana akarshaye, which means I will draw you forth and make you sit at my feet. So he sort of stomps down, Vajradhara does, he stomps down on Uma and Shiva and his wife. Now Shiva goes freaking nuts and he starts beating himself up, just crazed and whatnot. So Vajradhara uses another mantra to soothe him, to calm him down, and then dominates him with yet another mantra. And as he does that, through his foot that is on Vajradhara's head, he transmits the truth of Buddhism. And at this point, Mahadeva becomes reborn. He dies completely and is reborn in a very lower level, the realm of ashes, sort of like a cremation ground place, where he becomes sort of a Buddhist protector of Buddhism in this realm of ashes and suffering. So we've got another story. This is the subjugation of Mahadeva as found in a text called the Buddha-Dhammara Tantra. Now this Buddha-Dhammara Tantra is, it's a text that conjures female creatures, Bhutanis, ghosts, Naganis, snake gals, Yakshanis, these tree spirits, and so forth. Now, the text describes all these different like sort of cycles of rituals to conjure these deities forth and get them to do your bidding or give you gifts. And I'll have a few of these in just a second. So this text is a Buddhist text, but later on, maybe shortly after, maybe quite a bit while later, it's repackaged as a text that's dominated by Maheshwara, by Shiva again, takes out the conversion narrative, but leaves all these cycles for dominating deities. So let's read through just a few of these sort of rituals, because I want you to get a sense of this. This is what I call conjuring. In Indian magic, you have sort of three aspects. You have sorcery, then you have making fantastic items and enchanted things and doing amazing things that are not sorcery, and conjuring, and this is usually conjuring female spirits that, depending on how you placate them, will be able to give you great gifts or wealth or divine services. So here's one. Having gone to the convergence of a river, the practitioner creates a ritual circle or mandala using sandal powder. He should make an offering of flowers. He should fumigate the space with bdellium incense, gugula dupa, and chant the mantra 8,000 times. I don't have the mantra here for you. The mantra is thus perfected. Again, at night, he should perform another 1,000 mantra repetitions, and she will surely come. Having arrived, she copulates with the practitioner and becomes his wife. She leaves a gold coin under his bed when she leaves at dawn. Done every day at the end of the month, there is perfection. Now, if he approaches her in a different way, different things will happen. So here's another one. Having gone to the slope of a river, the practitioner creates a ritual circle, again a mandala, using sandal powder and offers milk, rice, and bloody offerings, bali. He should repeat the mantra 8,000 times over 7 days, and she will surely come. Once arrived, he gratifies her with sandal water, which is a common gift that you give someone. It's it's the essence of sandalwood powder that's dissolved in water. It's a common guest offering. So he gratifies her with sandal water, and she becomes his mother. She says, "My child, what shall I do?" The practitioner should say, "Grant me sovereignty." She shall protect his sovereignty, making him a great king, and she gives him clothing, jewelry, and celestial food. So the final one is, having gone to a temple of Sri Vajrayana, again, he should offer karavira, these are like a red flower, and fumigate with bdellium incense. He should repeat the mantra 8,000 times, and it is perfected. At night, he should again repeat the mantra 1,000 times, and she will surely come. Once arrived, he gives her a bed of kusha grass, and he should say, "You are welcome here. Become my wife." She will give him perfected divine alchemical substances, divya rasa rasayana siddhyadrava, and she will strike down all his enemies. Having mounted her back, she carries him up even to the heavens, and he will live for 100,000 years. So, very little risk, an awful lot of reward, but let's be clear. If she shows up and you hear the tinkling of bells behind you of her anklets, and you get afraid, she eats you. Wendy Doniger one time said that in Tantra, you work with a goddess, and when she appears, she'll either make him, the practitioner, her delighted consort, or make him her dinner. So in the story here, we see that Maheshwara is already dominated. It's already sort of after the fact. And what's going on is it's showing his complicity with Vajradhara Vajrapani in order to enliven the magic spells within and to dominate other deities. So Maheshwara, first off, right at the beginning of the text, he declares that the rites in here will be absolutely effective. They'll totally work. And at that point, he's sort of valorizing it, giving sort of legitimacy to the text. So Vajradhara speaks a mantra to murder all the Buddhas. It's like Buddha means like a ghost or a demon. So it's Buddha Marana. Marana is an act of magic that comes from the root mri, which we also have in English for murder. So he murders the mantra. He uses the mantra to murder all the demons. And what happens is innumerable lightning bolts emanate from all of his pores, sometimes set out of his nose, but here it's really all out of his pores. And they move forward, and it desiccates, sort of dries up and makes unconscious all the bodies of the demons. So this light, and I like to pick this stuff from Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where it's like light emanating and pouring into everything, and it makes their faces melt. So it'd be fun to have that clip right there. So at that point, all of the other Hindu gods, Indra, Brahma, and Vishnu, come forth, and they're terrified because they don't want to get murdered too. So they come forth and they actually pledge support for Buddhism. And they argue that all the demons will also protect Buddhism and Buddhists. Vajradhara then revives all of the dead. Light comes out of his nose at this point. So we have these innumerable lightning deities that came forth and killed everybody. And then you're like, he sends light out of his nose, and that goes into their bodies, and they're all revived. All of the dead are revived. So Vajradhara revivifies all the dead from this light that comes out of his nose. The next part, Aparajita, this lord of demons, comes forward, and he says, you know what, me too. I will make sure all these rites work. All the magic within will be affected. So Vajradhara then says, if, however, he enables bad people to use these rites in an evil way, then he's going to come down and stomp on Aparajita and all the other gods again. So again, he's giving a foundation myth for these magical rituals only being used in a good way that protects Buddhism. Maheshwara comes forward and declares that all of the spellcraft will serve the people, predominantly Buddhists. Vajradhara then revives all these smaller deities, these Bhutas, Yakshas, Nagas, all of the little, like, local, tiny little godlings. And all those deities turn to Mahadeva, turn to Maheshwara, and say that they will support the spells in the text. So in this narrative, Maheshwara is already dominated, and he supports Vajradhara in dominating all the demons and demonesses and getting them to support Buddhism and all the magical practices. So here are some conclusions here. One is that in this tantric Buddhism, there are ways that all of the innumerable Buddhas and deities can be incorporated into one deity that usually becomes a wrathful deity with the fangs and the flame. And that wrathful entity is very effective for dominating things in the world or fixing your worldly problems. We also see that mantras are used to dominate the world, and we see that the same mantras that are used to dominate those deities are the same types of mantras that are used in the spellcraft that follows. So one would argue that if the mantras can kill gods, how much more can they kill humans or dominate humans? So if a mantra can do this, then how much more so the smaller acts, like conjuring up a goddess who will give you coins every night. We see that those who resist the truth of Buddhism and the power of Buddhism and the Buddhist Vajrayana are completely dominated by that power. We see that Vajrayana is established as the dominant vehicle of Buddhism, the most effective one, the most useful one for living in the world. And we also see that Buddhism is declared to be the dominant religion of all people. Now, there's another option other than this forced conversion, and that's assimilation. Now, these conversion narratives usually involve sort of domination via sort of magical might, and they're violent. They disrespect the power of the converted. So this other paradigm is assimilation, which is not as violent. Assimilation uses sort of cultural soft power, and instead of violent narratives to integrate a deity into the system. And we're going to look at two examples of that. In one, the Buddha becomes an avatar of Vishnu, avatars. So avatar, one who crosses over. So Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu. Rama from the Ramayana is an avatar of Vishnu. We also see Parashuram, Rama with an axe. He's an avatar of Vishnu. He's an interesting one because he not only brings Tantra to the world somehow, but he actually murders all of the Kshatriyas. What happens is a Kshatriya kills his wife and he just gets pissed off. So he kills all the Kshatriyas, makes pools of their blood, and does like worship rituals with their blood. So this is a very sort of scary version of Vishnu. Then there's also Narasimha of Vishnu. That's the, I talked about him before. Narasimha of Vishnu is the man lion, in which there's a demon who says, he gets a boon from the gods, he gets a wish from the gods. They can't be killed inside or outside, a day or night, by a hand or a weapon, so by a man or a beast. So Vishnu becomes part man, part lion. He drags the guy out onto the temple wall, so he's neither inside nor outside. He kills him at twilight, so it's neither day nor night. And he kills him with a lion's paw, which is neither a weapon nor a hand. So these are the avatars of Vishnu, and in time, the Buddha is declared to be one avatar of Vishnu. And in fact, we'll see in the context of Sri Lanka that Vishnu becomes a local deity that is found in many small shrines, but he's also a national deity in the sense that he protects the people of Sri Lanka and the Buddhist religion. So the Buddha becomes an avatar. Now, in this sense, there's some buildup. So let's go back to the context of early Buddhism. Now, Buddhism really gets going in an area called Magadha, here sort of in the northeast of India and what is now Bengal. So in Magadha, we see a set of interesting arguments. So traditionally, Buddhism is argued, and you'd read this in a lot of textbooks, that Buddhism was created as a critique of Vedic sacrifice. But in Magadha, there was a widespread Sramana movement, Sramana, the strivers, Buddhism, Jainism, and ascetic Hinduism. So what happens was the Buddha didn't come in and say, Vedic sacrifice is bad, so I'm going to have this whole new religion. In fact, in the time in Magadha, Jainism and Buddhism and sort of speculative Hinduism starts making a whole different set of arguments that are very local, that are very in sync with one another, and don't actually say a whole lot about a critique of Vedic sacrifice. So it's not clear how strong Vedic religion was at the time. I think it was actually pretty, despite them having cultural influence, I don't think there was a lot of them. And we also start to wonder just how Vedic the Buddha actually was. Well, let's look at some of the philosophical sort of interventions that these Shramanas, this movement of strivers, argued for. So in their philosophical challenges, they argued that nirvana in Buddhism was liberation. So there's an idea of you can't escape these perpetual rebirths, and that even being reborn in heaven, as Vedic sacrifice ensures, is not that great of a deal. Jainism comes through and posits, so nirvana means the extinguishing, you're just done. In Jainism, they have another idea of liberation in which one removes all of the karmic debris that has acquired on their soul so that the soul can exist luminously apart from the world and in complete inaction where it doesn't generate any karma. In the sort of proto-Hinduism of this time, they posit a way of escaping what we like to call the second death. So in Vedic religion, you die and then hopefully you go to heaven. Well, they start getting this idea around this time that there is rebirth, which we actually don't see a ton of descriptions in the early Vedic materials. So these proto-Hindus said that through meditation and through personal practice, one can attain knowledge. And by that attainment of knowledge, one won't be forced into an unpleasant rebirth or go to a heaven or be reincarnated in a troubling manner. So these are some sort of critiques of sort of the Vedic worldview at the time. Now, Buddhism in particular has a set of critiques of sort of Hindu ideas. And we see that that Buddhism critiques this idea of there being an individual Atman. Remember, Buddhism is no self, anatman. There is no individual essence to the world. Now, as for Brahman, remember we talked in Advaita Vedanta about Atman is Brahman, that thou art. Now, there is no essential God that one can become, one essential state of being. Remember, Buddhism dissolves everything to show that there's nothing there. The powers of the gods, of the devas, are critiqued. They're not thought to be able to give salvation in Buddhism. So all in all, this idea of these essentially powerful gods and this essential powerful self that one would find in Hinduism is completely laid to waste by Buddhism. So was the Buddha a Vedicist? We have no real evidence that the Buddha was actually from a clan dedicated to Vedic sacrifice. We don't see him, doing Vedic sacrifices in particular when he's living in the temple under his father. And in fact, we have a later argument that people say about Buddhism that says that Buddha was just a Hindu who was called to something more, but he wasn't. I mean, he was kind of his own thing, and he became a Sramana. He didn't go from Hinduism to something else. All right, my dog's getting a little nutty. Oh, Arlo. Okay, so there was a Buddhist empire called the Mauryas. Now, the Mauryas were one of the first large empires in India, if not the first large empire in India. And they had a king named Ashoka. Now, Ashoka was the first universal emperor. He declared himself to be a Dharma Chakravartin. Now, what does that mean? Well, the Buddha was declared to either become when he was prophesied to either become a great religious leader or a great universal emperor. Now, Ashoka said, hey, I'm like the Buddha, but I have temporal power. So he was a Buddhist, and he actually recorded a bunch of inscriptions and pillars and whatnot that declare a sort of nonviolence, and declares that Buddhism is the greatest thing in the world. But in fact, when you look at the actual military records and whatnot, he was just as a bloodthirsty butcher as anybody else around. But he used Buddhism to sort of consolidate the understanding of his power and for people to understand him as an emperor, just as the Buddha was considered sort of a great man who became one who utterly ruled the cosmos through his own enlightened power. So, in the medieval era, so much later, we see that there's a change. Vishnu, instead of the Buddha, is declared to be sort of the universal emperor. And he was married to Shri. Shri is one of the goddess that he's married to. And that Shri is like, as we would say, like this guy, Shri Aurobindo, or I'm Shri Aaron, or whatever. Means like one who has incredible power and auspiciousness. So Vishnu is considered sort of a regent, a ruler over the entire earth. Now, Vishnu is really abstract. There's not a lot of real stories about him. He's sort of vague in the Vedas, even after that. But he is considered mighty. He is considered to have this sort of incredible power over the divinities and the world. So what we see here is we see avatars. So Vishnu, hard to get your head around. But the avatars you can really understand. So you have Krishna, who's the hero of the Mahabharata, who's just like the baddest dude in the planet. And he's easy to understand because you can approach him as a human form. He's not as vague and cosmic as Vishnu is. Then you have Rama with a bow. So Rama with a bow is Rama of the Ramayana. So he's sort of this great king who has to go into exile, and his wife is kidnapped, and then by a demon lord who lives in Sri Lanka, in fact, and then he goes and kills the demon lord and gets his wife back and establishes his rule in the world. And that's what the whole of the Ramayana is about. Then you have him as a dwarf. And as a dwarf, he is able to take 3 strides and go all over the heavens and the earths and the lower realms, and to go thousands and thousands of miles with each step. In fact, we see in the Pali Canon that the Buddha is described as being 3 striding. He takes 3 steps and he's able to cross the entire universe. So in this way, that Vishnu becomes these figures on the earth that come to stop the powers of evil kings. So in the Mahabharata, the clan of the Kauravas who fight the Pandavas who are wicked, Krishna comes to advise the Pandavas in order to establish righteousness. Just as Ravana in the Ramayana is the demon lord of Sri Lanka, Rama comes down to take care of business on that. Or you have that bad dude with a boon, and Narasimha comes down to take care of him. In this way, Vishnu becomes on the earth in order to establish righteousness. A king can say, I too am like Vishnu. I have the potency and the power of Vishnu within me, and I will establish righteousness on this world. So kings become like avatars. So how can the Buddha become an avatar? And we have some avatars here in this picture and the Buddha at the bottom. Well, the avatars tend to come sort of late in the game. In the Indian conception of time, you have 4 yugas. You have a golden age, then you have, which is everything is glorious and it's a very long time, and you meditate for thousands and thousands of years because people live for a long time, but there's a lack of unrighteousness. Then you have the next age, the 3rd yuga, in which things are not as good. And stuff's starting to get hairy and problematic, and there starts being unrighteousness in the world. Then you have the second yuga, in which there's lots of unrighteousness, but the gods still exist on the earth and people can easily interact with them. And then we have the Kali Yuga, the yuga that we're in right now. So Krishna is born at the beginning of the Kali Yuga. And if you look at the time frame on that, it's right around the time when the Kali Yuga starts that Mahavir from Jainism and Buddha of Buddhism start showing up. So in a sense, the Buddha shows up at the same time that like Krishna and Rama are hanging around. So he's sort of late to the game in the cosmic scheme of time. In this way, he fits nicely into this narrative of when the avatars start showing up. We get an argument later in Hinduism that says that the Buddha came to give a false doctrine that was very powerful, that in fact was given to delude kings. Now, kings who were Buddhists were great rulers for a very long period of time in India. So in this way, the Hindus could argue that the Buddha came to delude them, and then that establishes sort of like Vishnu as the Buddha, setting up this time period where there wasn't Hindu rule. And then, of course, furthermore, Buddha is put into the pantheon of the avatars in order to incorporate Buddha and Buddhism into Hinduism, but he's still dominated by Vishnu and Hinduism. So it takes Buddhism that is an independent religion and sort of reduces it to its own thing. In the modern times, we have a character named Swami Vivekananda. And so he's in the early 20th century. I've talked about him before. And he argued that the Buddha was his Ishtadevata, his chosen god. He also equates Buddha and Shankara. Shankara, the founder of Advaita Vedanta. Now, the intriguing here is that Shankara's work is clearly influenced by a whole bunch of other Buddhist writers, especially a guy named Nagarjuna, another guy named Gaudapada. So when we look at Shankara's writings, we see the influence of Hindu, and the influence of Buddhism quite a bit. Swami Vivekananda, or Swami V, also argues that the Buddha was a karma yogi, one who does the yoga of action, which was the type of service to the world, service to oneself, service to the community. That's the type of yoga that Swami Vivekananda talked about quite a bit. Now, above, I have what you see is it's a depiction of sort of holy figures, an organization called the Self-Realization Fellowship. They are a mid-20th century, and they continue to this day, neo-Hindu group. And they also not only claim the Buddha that they throw in there, but they claim that Christ was one of their guys. So we see that there is an argument within Hinduism that Christ was a Hindu and was an avatar. A sneaky little way around those Hindus. They'll get everybody in to their system. So I wanted to read this quote by Holt, our author that we read today, where he says, to summarize briefly then, the modern Indian acclamation of the Buddha had been preceded by his transformation as an avatar of Vishnu. So that when they wanted to say the Buddha is like this great figure, he's like the greatest of all Indian figures, and was the ideal, sort of an ideal version of Indianness, we have this idea of the Buddha was just an incarnation of Vishnu. So that's enabled there. His involvement within Vivekananda's Vedanta of universal pretensions in response to westernization. So Swami Vivekananda was trying to create a westernized Hinduism that could stand on its own against any sort of Western critiques, and is being regarded finally as one of India's great Bhumiputras, or sons of the soil, not soul. So this is the idea that he was just one of the many great Indian sort of prophets and figures. So what should not go unnoticed is that this modern transformation or reclamation of the Buddha takes place within the context of an evolving rhetoric of nationalist discourse, the secularized successor to the missionary oratories of Vivekananda. So by claiming that the Buddha was sort of a Hindu, or that the Buddha created Hinduism for exports, this buys into a narrative that of Indian nationalism, in which India is the best, and it is the best in the world, and it should get its rightful goal of being united in Hindu and should dominate all other places. So what about Buddhism and deities? I mean, so we've been talking a lot about deities in Buddhism, when in fact a lot of textbooks, people say Buddhism is atheistic. It doesn't have deities at all. And what's going on there is they're usually critiquing an idea of a creator God that rules everything. It's a kind of a monotheistic thing. But in fact, when you talk to Buddhists, they talk about deities all the time. And their stories have all sorts of interactions with deities and supernatural figures. So in this sense, the deities are not salvific. Unlike Shiva in Hinduism, God cannot give you liberation. God can't even give you knowledge in Buddhism, because the true knowledge is Buddhism. There are no sort of heavens or godly abodes. And we see these bodhisattvas have these heavenly realms where you can be reborn in and you can easily gain liberation, but there aren't sort of, you know, a Shiva heaven and whatnot. That's purely the realm of the Buddhas. So a rebirth as a god is considered a good thing if you die and are reborn as God, but it's temporary. You're not going to get liberated there. You're going to have this wonderful, powerful life that's just incredibly wonderful and filled with joy. You'll live a really long time, but then you'll be reborn again into suffering. Now, the deities are appealed to support daily life. They are laukika. They can support your worldly endeavors. All right. So with Buddhism, blah, 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 blah. There, you'll actually see that when they assimilate deities, there's not a forced or formal conversion. They just sort of roll Vishnu into things. All right, so Buddhism in India today, as I said, there was this argument that the Buddha has the pure knowledge of Hinduism, which is usually said to be Advaita Vedanta, even though Advaita Vedanta is way after Buddhism, and that he took it to other places in the world. When people describe Buddhism, though, when these Indian nationalists describe Buddhism, and remember, Buddhism doesn't really exist in India anymore, they really simplify it down and make Buddhism into something that doesn't challenge Hinduism. So they reduce the ideas of Buddhism so they can be sort of more conversant with Hindu ideas. So people would argue that the Buddha spoke the truth is inherently Indian, so the truth must be compatible with Hinduism. Now, these are arguments that sort of practicing Buddhists in Sri Lanka or Thailand or Tibet would make, but it has a political idea, and that's to have the dominance of Hinduism over Buddhism and show that the primacy of truth is not a Buddhist truth, but a Hindu truth that the Buddha sort of gets wrong, but it appeals to people. So we read in Holt about Vishnu becoming the protector of Sri Lanka, the little, well, it's not so little, the country that is to the north, or to the southeast of India. So first you see that Vishnu is found in the Pali Canon, so the body of early texts by the Buddhists. And in fact, there's another text called the Mahavamsha, so that's sort of the great lineage, and that's a later text in the Pali Canon, in which the Buddha, or Vishnu, is declared to be sort of the protector of the land of Lanka. So he's thought to be the chief minister and protector of the people and of the place. We also see that there are all sorts of local vernacular tales in which they say that Vishnu, in fact, showed up at the time of the Buddha's enlightenment and sort of protected him from Mara. So Vishnu is incorporated into the Buddha's liberation tale. Now, if you go to external areas in all over Sri Lanka, you'll find these small little shrines to Vishnu. Now, if you were to say, hey, that's the Hindu god Vishnu, the Buddhists around would be like, what are you talking about? He's Buddhist. Vishnu is Buddhist. So Vishnu gets integrated into these local networks and thereby becomes sort of normatively considered Buddhist. In fact, they'll even argue that Vishnu, as the protector of Sri Lanka and its people, he in fact is sort of a soul on the path to Buddhahood. So he is someone that is striving towards Buddhahood but has not made it there. So we do see other sort of Buddhist assimilations of gods. So here you have a Buddhist Ganesha. Ganesha is a god that nobody has too many problems with, so he's easy to roll in. And you see him in Thailand as well. A lot of people will get amulets to Ganesha that they'll wear, and he's considered a Buddhist protector deity. On the right is a picture of Brahma, the creator god. You see these images of Brahma all over Thailand, in which there might not be any temples to Brahma in India, but there's plenty of them in Thailand. So what's going on there? We'll talk more about that when we talk about Thai Buddhism. So what happens is Brahma and Ganesha are sort of non-confrontational. You know, Shiva is a problem. You can't really bring him into Buddhism. But because Ganesha is so affable and Brahma, you know, there just isn't that much going on with him, he's easy to roll into Buddhism. So deities that are less confrontational, less violent, less dominating, they're easier to roll into your system. So the Buddhists could easily pick up Ganesha and Brahma. All right. So here's a big picture of the Buddha in Sri Lanka. Is he not lovely and tall? And I hope you had a good class. Take care.